They were waiting for him. Cameras flared like tiny explosions as Calder stepped out of the car, his face expressionless, but his pulse outpacing his stride. The courthouse loomed ahead, gray, sharp-edged, and far too quiet for the chaos building inside his chest. Reporters called out his name, questions sharp enough to cut. "Mr. Rennett, any comments about the custody hearing? Is it true you didn't know about the children?" He didn't stop. His jaw tightened. His gaze stayed locked on the courthouse doors, as if walking any slower would give his mind room to collapse in on itself. His coat flared slightly with his stride, polished shoes soaked from the curbside, but he didn't feel any of it. Not the cold, not the stares, not even the cameras trying to catch a crack in his composure. What did they expect him to say? That he was here to face the woman he once thought he'd grow old with? That he only learned, days ago, that she hadn't just left him, but had taken a part of him with her? 3 parts, actually. Triplets, his children, his sons. He didn't know their faces, didn't know their names. For 5 years, they had existed somewhere in the world without him, living, laughing, growing. And no matter how powerful he was in boardrooms, no matter how many zeros followed his name, he couldn't rewind time, couldn't fix 5 lost birthdays, couldn't reclaim what had been stolen in silence. As the courthouse doors opened before him, a voice inside whispered, "You built a fortune, Calder. But what did it cost you? If you believe in second chances and stories that reach deeper than words, go ahead and like this video. Drop a comment if you've ever wished for a do-over. And don't forget to subscribe, because this one, it'll stay with you." Security waved him through with a nod, but Calder barely noticed. He wasn't here as the CEO of a company that reshaped industries. He wasn't here as a headline. He was here as a man who missed something too important to name. The hallway stretched out before him, narrow, quiet, sterile. Every step felt heavier than the last. People passed him, murmuring in low tones, papers rustling, shoes tapping faintly across tile. But all of it blurred into background noise as he reached the courtroom door. He paused. His hand rested on the handle. For a moment he stood still, completely still, as if moving forward would change everything he thought he knew about his own past, about her, about himself. His eyes closed, and behind the lids came flashes. Isolde's laughter in their old apartment, soft and unexpected. The way she used to touch his wrist when she needed reassurance. The envelope on the table that morning, the one he didn't open quickly enough. He'd been building his empire, yes, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how to hold a hand, how to look someone in the eye and be there. And now, she had children. His children, their children. How do you face someone you failed without ever meaning to? How do you apologize for being absent from memories you never knew existed? His fingers curled tighter around the handle. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. He opened the door and walked into the room. She was already there. Isolde, 5 years older, and somehow still familiar in ways that made his chest tighten. Her face was calm, but her eyes, those eyes, held something between fear and defiance. And in that split second he knew, whatever today was supposed to be, it wouldn't end the way he thought. The room was quiet, but not empty. A judge sat in calm observation, flipping through documents. An attorney whispered something to Isolde, who didn't look away from Calder, not even for a second. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She knew what her presence alone would do to him. And it did. His breath caught, barely noticeable. But there, something sharp and unfamiliar pressed against his chest. Regret, maybe. Or something heavier. A file sat on the judge's desk, thick and sealed with a tab. Calder's attorney leaned in to whisper, "It's the confirmation." Confirmation. That word didn't feel real. Neither did this room, this moment, this woman who had once kissed the back of his hand like it was holy, and then disappeared without even telling him he was going to be a father. 3 times over, Calder swallowed the heat building in his throat and turned his eyes back to her. She blinked slowly. It wasn't hate in her eyes, not even anger. It was something worse. It was pain and conviction. She had come ready for battle. "Mr. Rennett," the judge began, voice steady and low, "today we are here under unique and unexpected circumstances. You've petitioned for custodial rights of children you claim to have only recently learned about. Is that correct?" Calder nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." "And the mother, Ms. Breyer, contests the petition on grounds of prior abandonment and emotional risk to the children." That stung. He didn't show it. The judge folded his hands. Before we begin, Ms. Breyer has requested to present preliminary documentation that may contextualize the situation. Isolde opened her bag slowly, no dramatic movements, just calm, practiced grace. She pulled out a folder, thick, worn at the edges, passed it to the court clerk without a word, and Calder, for the first time in his life, found himself afraid of what he might see. The folder was opened. Inside, photos, drawings, school records, not just facts, lives. 3 small boys, slate blue eyes, the kind Calder used to see in the mirror before he stopped looking long enough to notice himself fading. One of the photos was a crayon sketch. 3 stick figures with identical grins. The tallest figure, drawn in blue, had a square jaw and broad shoulders. Labeled simply, "My Dad." His chest tightened. The judge held up another page, report cards, art projects, a handprint in red paint. Calder didn't speak, couldn't. His voice was somewhere buried beneath years of silence and work and sacrifice. The kind of sacrifice that feels noble until it starts costing things you can't replace. The court clerk passed him a few sheets to review. His hand trembled. One of the drawings had tiny letters in the corner. Reed, Elian, Wells, names. Names he hadn't picked. Birthdays he'd missed. First words he'd never heard. They exist. They're real. He looked up slowly. His eyes found Isolde's again. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't cold. She looked tired, but not weak. Just the kind of tired that comes from carrying the weight of love and consequence for far too long alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" Calder's voice was quiet. Isolde didn't answer. Not yet. There'd be time for words. Right now, the weight of silence was enough. The courtroom was still, but Calder's thoughts weren't. He sat beside his attorney, barely hearing the low conversation happening inches from him. Words like testimony, violation, intent to conceal floated by, but none of them mattered. Not right now. Across from him sat the woman who had once chosen his arms as her home. Now, she barely glanced his way. Isolde. She hadn't changed in loud ways. But something in her posture told him she was no longer the girl who painted sunrises on apartment walls. She was sharper now, steadier, like someone who had been forced to learn strength in silence. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "We will begin today's hearing with a brief summary of the petition and the respondent's initial statement." A clerk stood. Her voice was neutral, measured. "Mr. Calder Rennet, petitioner, has filed a request for partial custody and visitation rights of 3 minor children, Reed, Elian, and Wells, Breyer, alleging that he was unaware of their existence due to lack of communication following the dissolution of marriage to Miss Isolde Breyer." Calder kept his eyes on the folder, the one with the drawings, with the name labels, with the evidence that his life had continued without him in the rooms where it mattered most. The clerk continued. "Miss Breyer, respondent, acknowledges the biological connection, but asserts that full custody remains in the best interest of the children, citing prolonged absence, emotional risk, and concern for sudden reintegration." Sudden reintegration. Calder felt that phrase pierce something tender, as if his presence could somehow be more damaging than his absence had been. The judge nodded. "Thank you." "Ms. Breyer, you may speak." Isolde rose slowly. She didn't carry a prepared statement. No legal pad, no stack of documents, just her voice. Steady, low. "I understand how this looks," she began, "and I know how much anger it will cause. But everything I've done, every choice I made, was to protect 3 little boys who deserved peace, not questions." Her hands clasped in front of her. "I didn't hide them because I hated him," she continued, glancing briefly toward Calder. "I hid them because the man I once loved had become unreachable." Calder felt his throat tighten. Unreachable. The word lingered in the air longer than anything the judge had said so far. Isolde didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth didn't require volume to carry weight. "I called once," she said. "The night I found out I was pregnant. I had rehearsed what I'd say, but then I saw an interview online. You were standing on a stage, holding a microphone, and smiling as you said you were postponing everything for your company's expansion. You were quoted saying, 'Family can wait. This moment can't.'" The courtroom didn't react. No one gasped. No reporters scribbled. But Calder's heart did something strange. A twist. A squeeze. He remembered that interview. He remembered saying it, casually, like it meant nothing. But now, looking back, it was a stone thrown into a river he never realized he'd poisoned. "I didn't want to beg for your attention," Isolde said. "I wanted to raise them in a world where love was loud, not scheduled." Her voice cracked, barely, and then steadied again. "I made a choice I never thought I'd have to make, but I didn't do it in anger. I did it in fear." The judge lifted a pen but didn't write anything. Calder stood. His attorney touched his arm, signaling him to sit, but Calder didn't. "Your Honor," he said, voice low, "may I respond?" The judge looked at him carefully, then nodded once. He turned toward Isolde. "I wasn't unreachable," he said. "I was blind to everything but what I thought I needed to become." He paused, exhaled. "I won't pretend I didn't fail. I did. But not because I stopped loving you. I failed because I thought love could wait." His voice dropped. "I know now it couldn't." Isolde blinked, eyes glistening. The courtroom was silent again. Not because anyone demanded it, but because the weight of what had been said left no space for anything else. The judge finally spoke. "Thank you both. We'll now enter the next stage of this hearing." But Calder barely heard him. His eyes never left the woman across from him. And for the first time since stepping into that building, he didn't feel like a man with something to prove. He felt like a father, with something to fight for, before the courtroom, before the titles, before the decisions he couldn't take back. Calder was just a man, with a notebook full of sketches and a head full of restless ideas. Back then he wasn't anyone important, not to the world anyway, but he mattered to her. They met on a quiet evening at a fundraiser he'd nearly skipped. He didn't own a tie at the time, just borrowed one from a friend and arrived late. She was working behind the bar, her sleeves rolled and a pencil tucked behind her ear. Not part of the crowd, just passing through it. Her name was Isolde. He had only planned to ask for a drink. What he got instead was a conversation that pulled him out of himself. She told him she was an illustrator, mostly children's books, but that night she was covering a shift for a friend. "You draw machines?" she asked when he mentioned his prototype. "No," he replied. "I draw the future." She laughed, but not to mock him. There was curiosity in her eyes. "What does it look like?" she asked. He hesitated, then flipped over a cocktail napkin and drew something simple, a circuit grid shaped like a tree. Roots tangled in numbers, branches reaching out in thin wires. "Looks a little lonely," she said softly. He looked at her. "It's not meant to be." That night, they didn't dance with everyone else. They sat at the far end of the room, talking until the lights dimmed and the cleanup crew swept around them. She wrote her number on the back of the napkin. Above it, she scribbled 3 words, "Don't disappear again." They didn't fall in love overnight. It happened in moments, soft, steady, unspoken. Sunday afternoons became their ritual. She'd spread her sketchbook across the floor while he tinkered with wires and circuit boards. Music played low in the background, usually old records she swore kept her sane. They shared takeout more than groceries, and their apartment didn't match. But the space was theirs, framed by crooked photo strips, half-watered plants, and warmth that didn't need explanation. Calder had never been a man of many words, but with her, he found his voice in the quietest places. On nights when he couldn't sleep, he wrote her lines of unfinished poetry and tucked them into her sketchbook. Some were scribbled on receipts, others on the backs of her drawings, always short, always real. She kept every single one. One winter night, power went out in their building. They lit candles and danced in the kitchen barefoot, her cheeks warm from laughter. He hummed a tune she used to sing while brushing her hair. He never knew the words, but the melody stayed with him. She told him she wanted children someday. Not right away, but one day. He told her he wanted to build something that mattered. She said, "You already are." They made promises, not grand, not loud, but real, that they'd always talk before turning away. That work would never outrun love. That they'd grow together, even if it wasn't always side by side. And for a while, they did. But as Renvie grew, so did the distance. Meetings bled into weekends. Phone calls went unanswered. The notes stopped coming. One day she asked, "Do you still see me in your future?" He said, "I don't have time to think about the future right now." She nodded, and never asked again. He waited, at first with hope, then with doubt, finally with silence. Calder had never been the kind of man to chase something that didn't want to be caught, but she wasn't just someone. She was the only person who had ever seen through the ambition, through the plans and titles, and still believed in the boy behind the drive. And she had vanished. No note beyond the one with the pregnancy test. No return call. No message. No goodbye. He reached out to her old number. Disconnected. He emailed. Nothing. He even messaged an old friend of hers on social media. The message went unread for weeks. When a reply finally came, it was short. She's okay. She just needs space. Calder didn't believe in guessing games. He needed answers. So he paid for them. A private investigator with a clean record and a quiet reputation took the job. Calder provided everything. Past addresses, handwriting samples, old photos, even sketches his old had drawn in the margins of his journals. The man took the case seriously. Updates came every few days, some vague, some hopeful. She may have traveled west. There's a transaction in a rural town under the name Briar. Could be her. We're tracking possible leads, but she's covering her trail. Weeks passed. Leads dried up. Eventually, the investigators' messages stopped arriving altogether. Then came the envelope, unmarked, delivered by courier, and resting on Calder's desk when he arrived one morning. Inside, divorce papers. Signed, filed, clean. No message, no forwarding address, no explanation. Just her name in ink beside his. Officially severed. He stared at it for what felt like hours, not because he didn't know what it meant, but because he knew exactly what it didn't say. There was no mention of a child. That became his anchor, his justification. If there had been a baby, wouldn't she have said something? Wouldn't there be something in the papers? Some clause, some reference, even a sentence about future responsibilities? There was nothing. So he convinced himself that maybe the test was wrong, or maybe she had changed her mind, or maybe she had imagined it and left before she could be talked out of it. He didn't know, and that ignorance became its own kind of safety. He buried himself in his company, let his days fill to the brim. Early mornings, late nights, flights, contracts, people. Everyone around him said the same thing. You're on fire right now. He wasn't. He was just burning through the hours. The apartment stayed untouched. He never canceled the lease, but he didn't return either. It felt like trespassing on something that no longer belonged to him. He told himself he was fine, that he'd moved on, but grief has a way of settling in places no one can see, not even you. It was in the way he flinched when he heard a lullaby playing in a cafe, in the way he paused when a child with dark curls passed him in a crowd, in the way he still woke up at 3:17 a.m., the time she used to whisper his name just to feel him roll closer. It didn't matter how successful he became, how many awards he won, how many articles quoted him. There was a silence in his life now, and it didn't echo. It just sat with him, quiet and cruel, a reminder that some things don't break loudly. They just disappear. 5 years had passed. Calder was no longer the man who signed those papers. Or maybe he was just quieter about it now. His company had grown into something massive, branches across the coast, a valuation that made headlines, teams that answered to his nod. People admired him. Some feared him. None really knew him. He kept it that way. The only events he showed up for were those that aligned with public image. Award ceremonies, investor forums, carefully curated appearances. So when Renviz hosted its annual outreach program for local schools, Calder's attendance was more obligation than interest. A polished suit, a few polite smiles, and a speech he'd deliver without notes. He wasn't expected to mingle, but he did. Just briefly. A volunteer approached him near the robotics display. She wore the school's logo on her polo shirt and held a clipboard under one arm. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. The kids loved the experience today, especially the Briar boys. He nodded politely, ready to move on, until she added, "They were so excited when they saw your photo on the wall in the hallway. I swear 2 of them have your exact eyes. The youngest even has that same left cheek dimple." The air shifted. "What did you say their name was?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Briar," she replied. 3 of them. Triplets, I think. They're in the 2nd grade. Smart kids. Real creative. Their mom is, what's her name?" Her voice faded into the background. "Briar, 2nd grade. Triplets." Calder stood still long after the woman walked away. His fingers curled slightly. Not in anger, in memory. She had taken her middle name after the divorce. Isolde Breyer. Triplets. His sons? He didn't say goodbye to anyone that day. Just walked straight to his car and sat behind the wheel in silence for a long, long time. That night, Calder didn't sleep. He sat in his home office with a single lamp on and a dozen tabs open on his laptop. School directories, public volunteer pages, small-town news clippings. He searched for any mention of that name, Breyer, paired with 3 second-grade boys. At first, nothing came up. Then he remembered something. A small school in a nearby county known for its arts-integrated curriculum. It had received a donation from Renvi 2 years earlier. He opened their website. Faculty photos. Student showcases. A slideshow banner on the homepage featuring a spring festival. His breath caught. There they were. 3 boys. Nearly identical. Holding paper rockets, their faces lit with pride. One had a gap between his front teeth. Another wore glasses too big for his face. The third had a smudge of paint on his cheek. They were laughing. It wasn't just the eyes. It wasn't just the cheekbones. It was in the shape of their hands, the subtle curve of their ears, the slope of their brows. He was looking at his own blood. He clicked into the school's PDA page, found the name listed under emergency contacts for all 3 children. Isolde Breyer. There was no longer room for denial. She had been pregnant. She had given birth. She had raised them. Without him. Calder closed the laptop slowly. His heart wasn't racing. It was beating steadily, deliberately, the way it did right before he stepped into a high-stakes negotiation. But this wasn't a deal. This was his life. The next morning he didn't go into the office. Instead, he called his legal advisor. "I need to file a petition," he said. "For what?" "For access to 3 minor children," Calder replied. "There's no record of me on their birth certificates, but they're mine, and I can prove it." "Is this about custody?" the advisor asked, already flipping through notes. "No," Calder said quietly. "This is about truth. It started with paperwork. Not headlines, not drama. Just a man sitting across from his attorney, staring at forms that made his breath catch in his throat. He didn't speak at first. Just read. Read Calder Breyer. Ellie and Jace Breyer. Wells, Orion Breyer. All born within a week of the date Isolde left. No listed father on the certificates. No mention of him in any medical forms. No legal trail linking him to them. Only biology and the unmistakable reflection of himself in their features. "They're not just boys," Calder said quietly. "They're my sons." His attorney nodded. "We'll begin the process with a formal paternity claim. Once the test confirms biological connection, we can move to file for partial custody, or structured visitation depending on the court's view of best interest." Calder stared at the pages again. "She never listed me once." "It happens," the attorney said. "Some people choose to raise children alone, especially if they believe the other parent is unwilling or unfit." "I was neither," Calder said sharply. "I was uninformed. I understand. The law doesn't always assume intent. It responds to documentation." That word again. Documentation. So much of Calder's life had been built on proof. Contracts, IP filings, shareholder reports. His world respected what could be verified. But this was his flesh and blood. No signatures, no paperwork. Just memory, loss, and 3 names he had never spoken aloud until this week. A few days later, the DNA results came back. He didn't even need to open them. The look on his attorney's face told him everything. "It's confirmed," the man said. "All 3 are yours." Calder's throat went dry. His eyes didn't sting, not right away. But his hands trembled as he folded the papers and placed them back in the envelope, as if he couldn't bear to look at them any longer than necessary. For the first time in years, Calder didn't go into the office. He sat at home, the folder untouched on the table in front of him, the one that confirmed what his heart already knew. 3 sons. He should have felt rage or heartbreak, but what came was heavier than both. Silence. A silence so dense it pressed against his ribs, as if even breathing in the truth might shatter something inside him. He pulled out the printed birth records again. All 3 born within minutes of each other, a single early morning in late spring, in a hospital less than 2 hours from where he had once lived. While he was hosting investor meetings and being photographed shaking hands, 3 lives had entered the world, and none of them knew his name. She had done it alone. The thought cut deeper than he expected, not because he blamed her entirely, but because some part of him knew. He had made it easy for her to leave. The petition was filed the next day. Custody rights, visitation evaluation, court-supervised psychological review. A judge would determine whether Calder's absence, intentional or not, had caused damage, whether reintegrating him would confuse or help the boys. The word father didn't come with immunity. It had to be earned. His legal team submitted his background, financial records, references. A formal request for a court date was made. A notice was issued to Isolde and her legal representative. She had 30 days to respond. She didn't wait that long. The response came in under a week. Short, professional. She acknowledged Calder's paternity. She contested custody. She requested supervised-only interaction, pending a family counselor's evaluation and a closed hearing. It wasn't unexpected, but it still hurt. Calder read her statement twice. The closing line stayed with him. This petition is not being challenged out of anger, but out of love. I will always protect my sons, even if it means protecting them from their own father. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks from Friday, and for the first time in his adult life, Calder wasn't preparing a strategy. He was preparing for a conversation that would change everything. The courtroom was colder than Calder remembered. Not physically, but in the way people sat, distant, careful, guarded. The way no one met anyone's eyes for too long, as if emotions were too heavy to handle publicly. He sat at the table beside his attorney, eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. Isolde entered quietly. No drama, no delays. She wore a navy dress with long sleeves and simple earrings. Her hair was pulled back the way she used to do when painting for long hours, out of her face, but never without softness. A small stack of documents sat in her hands. She didn't look at him. The judge cleared his throat. We're here today to review the custody petition submitted by Mr. Calder Rennet and the response filed by Mrs. Isolde Breyer. All parties present? Both attorneys nodded. Calder didn't blink. Miss Breyer, the judge said, you requested to speak directly before any formal evidence is submitted. You may proceed. Isolde stood slowly. Her voice, when it came, wasn't weak. It wasn't even cold. It was something else, something steady, something lived in. I understand how this looks, she said, and I know how it must feel, to sit there and believe I took something from you. She paused. But I didn't do this to punish you. I did it to protect them. She glanced down at the folder in her hand. I didn't vanish to hide. I disappeared to survive. For them, not from fear of you as a man, but from what your life had turned into. She stepped forward and handed the folder to the court clerk. Inside, you'll find school reports, health evaluations, drawings, teacher notes. I didn't come here to debate their existence. You already know they're yours. I came to show you who they are. The judge gave a nod to the clerk, who distributed copies to both legal teams and the bench. Calder's attorney leaned in to whisper, you don't have to look at these now. But he did. He reached for the packet with a quiet hand. The first page was a report card. Reads, math scores high. Comments from the teacher about his curiosity, his quiet focus, his habit of taking things apart just to see how they worked. The next page showed Elian's writing sample. A paragraph about clouds. Not the science of them, the shape, the movement, the feel of sky underneath their bellies. The third page was Wells, a drawing. It wasn't artistic in a conventional way, but it showed 3 boys holding hands. One was smiling. One was flying. One had his hand outstretched, offering a small heart drawn in red crayon. Calder's breath hitched, not at the drawing itself, but at the signature at the bottom, spelled in shaky, rounded letters. Wells Rennet, not Breyer. Rennet. Calder's fingers hovered over the drawing. He stared at the name again, not because he doubted it, but because it felt like someone reaching across time to say, I don't hate you. I just didn't know you yet. The courtroom was quiet. No interruptions. No whispers, just the weight of what had been laid bare. The judge continued flipping through the documents, taking his time with each page. When he paused, it was on a short handwritten note, likely from one of the boys. The words weren't polished, but they were sincere. My mom says everyone has a story, but some people forget to finish theirs. Calder lowered his gaze. Isolde returned to her seat. Her hands folded neatly, her posture unmoved. But her eyes flicked toward him once, not long enough to linger, just long enough to say, "I'm telling you who they are, because you need to know, not because I owe you." The judge placed the documents aside and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you, Ms. Breyer. This information will be considered in our overall review. Mr. Rennett, you may respond if you wish." Calder stood. For a moment, he didn't speak. He didn't rehearse. There were no boardroom tactics here, just the kind of honesty that only came when you were standing in the ruins of something you helped destroy and were still willing to rebuild anyway. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "Not anymore. I came because I needed to see what was real. I spent years wondering if I imagined everything, if the silence meant I'd been mistaken. But I wasn't. They exist, and I missed everything." He looked down. "I missed their first steps, their first words. I don't know their favorite colors. I don't know what scares them or what makes them laugh. I don't know how they like their sandwiches cut." He looked back up. "But I want to." A beat of silence. "Not to make up for what's been lost, because I can't, but because I have a chance to be here now, and I'll take whatever part of their lives I'm allowed to step into." He sat. The room stayed still. The judge nodded once. "I'll schedule a private evaluation with both parties and a child development specialist. A follow-up hearing will be set within 30 days. Until then, no unsupervised visitation. But both sides may begin preparing proposals for introductory interaction under court supervision." Gavel struck. Hearing adjourned. Calder exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. As people stood and began filing out, he remained seated. So did Isolde. For a long moment, neither spoke. But then, quietly, her voice reached him. "They're not afraid of you," she said. "They don't even know they should be." He turned toward her. She met his eyes. "That's not a threat," she added. "It's a gift." She stood and walked out, heels soft against the polished floor. Calder stayed behind, hand resting on the folder, pages warm from where he'd held them. He had seen their faces now. He had heard the words. There was no turning back. The private chamber was smaller than Calder expected. No jury, no rows of eyes. Just 4 walls, a wooden table, and 2 chairs positioned across from each. Other-like opponents on opposite ends of a long, unfinished conversation. He stepped in first, heart pounding against his ribs in steady protest. Isolde followed quietly, her eyes lowered for a beat too long. The judge gave a curt nod before stepping out and closing the door behind them. Calder stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or sit. Isolde pulled out a chair and lowered herself onto the edge of the seat like someone unsure if they were allowed to rest. For a moment, there was only the distant ticking of a clock and the hum of fluorescent lighting. Then she lifted her gaze. "You deserve to know," she said softly. Calder sat, arms braced on his knees. "Then tell me, I found out I was pregnant the same week you closed that first funding round," she began. "You remember? You flew to Boston the day before my birthday." He nodded. "I came back with a ring." "You did," she whispered. "And for a while, I told myself we could make it work, that we'd figure it out, even if the timing was all wrong." He watched her face carefully. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cold. She was tired, the kind of tired that lived in bones, not skin. "I waited a few weeks," she continued. "Then one night, I decided to call you. I needed to hear your voice, to tell you we weren't just us anymore." Her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "But when I opened my phone, the first thing I saw was a news headline. One of those flashy tech blogs." She swallowed. "Renve CEO, family comes second right now. No time for distractions." Calder's head lowered. The words tasted like metal in his mouth. "I know what that sounds like." "It sounded like a wall," she said, cutting in gently. "One I couldn't climb over. I didn't want to fight for a place in your life. I wanted to build a life for them without waiting for someone who'd already made his choice." "I hadn't," he said quietly. "I didn't even know." "I know," she replied, softer now. "That's what made it so hard. You weren't cruel, you were just gone. You were building something enormous, and I didn't want our children to be raised as a footnote." He pressed his palm against his chest, almost instinctively. "You should have told me anyway." "I wanted to," she admitted. "Every birthday, every time one of them got sick, when Reed built a windmill out of cereal boxes, when Elian cried because the clouds made him nervous, when Wells looked at me and said he wanted to grow up to be a good man, not rich, Not smart, just good. Calder blinked fast. He couldn't stop the sting. They're everything, she said, and I was afraid that if I let you in while you were still chasing everything else, they'd end up feeling like I did. Secondary. He looked across the table, voice hoarse. What now? Isolde held his gaze. Now, you show them who you are, not with promises, not with speeches, but with your time, your consistency, your presence. Calder leaned back in his chair, spine stiff, eyes damp. The room felt smaller now, not because of tension, but because the truth took up space. A truth he hadn't prepared for, one he could neither argue nor undo. He cleared his throat. You said I should show them who I am, but what if I don't know anymore? Isolde gave a sad smile. Then it's time you meet the version of yourself they deserve. He took a slow breath, steadying the storm in his chest. Are they happy? He asked. Isolde nodded. Most days. Reed builds things with paper and tape. Ilian sketches entire weather systems on scrap paper. Wells, he sings to plants. They laugh, they argue, they ask about you. That last part sent something sharp into Calder's ribs. What do you tell them? That their father was someone I once loved deeply. That he had dreams so big sometimes they got in the way of the people who loved him. But I believed, still believe, he has a good heart. His throat tightened. I didn't hate you, Calder, she whispered. I was heartbroken. I was tired. I was afraid that if I stayed and raised them beside a man who couldn't, I'd see them. I'd be teaching them how to settle for being invisible. He looked up, eyes wide with guilt. I never wanted you to feel that. I know, she said, holding his gaze. But you did. Silence again. But this time, not empty. He finally spoke. If I could go back. I wouldn't let you, she interrupted softly. Because going back would mean they'd be raised in a house of waiting and wanting. I chose a life where their love wasn't measured by how busy you were. I missed so much, he whispered. But you're here now, she said, and they still have time to know you. If you want that, I do. She studied him. They'll need more than birthday gifts and weekend visits. They'll have all of me, he said. Not Calder, the CEO, just Dad. If they'll let me. Tears formed in her eyes. They will. He reached across the table, not to touch her hand, but to steady himself against the weight of the moment. I'm sorry, Isolde. I know, she whispered. A knock at the door broke the stillness. A bailiff peeked in, signaling their time was up. Isolde stood first, smoothing her coat. Calder rose, slower, as though standing meant carrying something new. Not burden, responsibility. As she turned to go, she paused at the doorway. They each made you something. For the hearing. Drawings. Reed built a little robot out of magnets. It moves if you press the head. A breath escaped his lips, part laugh, part ache. I'd like to see them. You will? She stepped out. And Calder stood alone in the room, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like the beginning of something earned. Have you ever held on to a truth, believing it was the only way to protect someone you love? Let us know below. Your voice matters. Your story could help someone heal. The judge's ruling arrived with a signature that shook Calder more than any merger deal ever had. Supervised visitation granted. He wasn't sure what to expect walking into the community room that day. His tie was missing. His usual armor, pressed suit, rehearsed posture, polished voice, felt useless here. There was only the quiet stretch of anticipation, and the sound of small feet turning the corner. 3 boys stood in the doorway. They weren't afraid, just curious, observing him with the same kind of intense focus he once used to study circuit boards and early code. Their eyes flicked from his shoes to his face, and Calder felt stripped bare in a way no shareholder could have achieved. The tallest one stepped forward, a plastic robot clutched in one hand. His tone was steady. You're Calder. Calder's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The second boy didn't wait. He stepped in front of the first, holding a book upside down and peeking at Calder from under shaggy bangs. You look like the man in our hallway photo. The smallest didn't say a word. He walked to Calder and simply reached for his hand. And Calder, without thinking, bent down and let him take it. It felt too small to hold so much trust. Hi, he finally managed. The eldest boy tilted his head. You're late. I'm sorry. But you came, said the boy with the upside-down book. That's when Calder realized they weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for presents. Inside the room, a table held art supplies, snacks, and a few toys. Calder sat cross-legged on the floor. It wasn't dignified. It wasn't controlled. But when Reed began showing him how the robot's elbow joint worked, Calder listened. When Elian read a paragraph from his book, completely upside down, Calder didn't correct him. When Wells crawled into his lap without a word and leaned his head on Calder's chest, something cracked open inside him. The visits became routine, but nothing about them ever felt ordinary. Calder started rearranging his calendar. Meetings were missed. Calls postponed. For the first time since Renvies launched, he wasn't apologizing for needing space. He was defending it. One afternoon he arrived with small brown paper bags, lunches he'd packed himself. They were lopsided, unevenly filled, and a bit crumpled. But Elian beamed when he found a hand-drawn lightning bolt on his sandwich wrapper. "You remembered," he whispered. "That's my symbol." Reed proudly showed off a sketch of a robot design he'd drawn just for Calder. "You're the only person I've met who might know how to build it." Wells didn't need fanfare. He simply walked up, placed his head against Calder's chest, and whispered, "You came back." Calder blinked fast, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to escape. He began to study them the way he once studied markets, observing, listening, adapting. Reed liked silence when he built things. Elian needed background noise and a flood of questions. Wells liked rhythm, soft humming, tapping, patterns in the floor tiles. They didn't expect Calder to fix anything. They expected him to be there. After one visit, as Calder stepped out into the hallway, he found Isolde waiting by the door. She wore a quiet expression, somewhere between relief and caution. "They talk about you on the drive home," she said. He waited. "Elian said you asked him about his favorite author." "No one's ever asked." Calder exhaled. "I don't know how to make up for 5 years." "You're not trying to make up for them," she replied. "You're building the next 5. Some days he brought Mars maps. Other days, paper airplanes. One Saturday, he came with 3 small whiteboards and markers. "I want to know your plans," he told them. Reed listed blueprints. Elian wrote out a dramatic mystery series starring a detective named Jellybean. Wells drew a stick figure holding 3 balloons. Calder pointed. "Who's that?" Wells shrugged. "You." "Holding us?" The words didn't sound rehearsed. Just true. That night, Calder sat in his office, staring at a blank email draft. Not a pitch, not a press release, just an open screen meant for one sentence. "Today, I became a father." He didn't hit send. He closed the laptop and leaned back, heart full, mind quiet. He didn't need the world to know yet. For now, it was enough that 3 little boys already did. This isn't just Calder's story. It's yours. It's mine. It's every person who's ever looked up from a busy calendar and realized they've forgotten the very reasons they were working so hard in the first place. It's for anyone who's loved too late, or learned just in time. Because at some point, life will ask all of us a question. What did it cost you? And sometimes the price isn't money. It's not title. It's not reputation. Sometimes the cost is silence around a dinner table. Missed birthdays. First steps you didn't see. Laughter you weren't around to hear. That's what Calder learned. Not in one day. Not in one visit. But slowly, through paper robots, upside-down books, and quiet hands that asked for nothing more than his attention. See, love isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about showing up when you're tired, listening when you'd rather speak, choosing connection when convenience would be easier. And parenthood? It's not the photographs you hang in your office. It's the way your child looks at you during a school play, the way they reach for your hand in a crowded room. It's being there for the small things, because they were never small to begin with. We chase promotions, headlines, recognition. But what matters waits for us in simpler places, a hallway drawing, a giggle under the covers, a whispered, "Are you staying this time?" Calder had built something the world applauded, but it wasn't until he packed a lunch, sat at a school bench, and watched his son forget his lines that he understood what success truly meant. Success is not applause. It's not a corner office. It's not a news headline or a company valuation. It's a child saying dada without hesitation. It's a mother who once walked away, choosing to speak again. It's forgiveness, not forced, not rushed, but real. The truth is we don't always get second chances, but if they come, you take them. even if they come with awkward silences, with missed years, with hearts that need mending. You take them, because presence heals more than perfection ever could. So ask yourself, are you building a life, or are you building a legacy no one will be there to inherit emotionally? Are you chasing achievements or planting roots? Calder once said, "Family comes second right now." He believed that until 3 pairs of eyes asked him, without a word, to prove otherwise. And when he finally showed up, not with gifts, not with speeches, not with guilt, but with himself, that's when the healing began. So to you, watching this, what has life taught you the hard way? What had to break before you understood what mattered? Share that lesson. Someone out there might need to hear it. Someone younger, someone struggling, someone standing where you once stood. Sometimes your pain is the doorway to someone else's healing. Sometimes your change becomes their map. And always, always, there's time to start again. If Calder could learn to sit still, hold small hands, and find home not in a house but in people, then maybe so can you. 6 months had passed. Not quietly, but with the kind of hum that fills a home. Lunchboxes packed with tiny hands. Early mornings trading deadlines for cereal spills. Laughter from the living room instead of call tones from a Bluetooth earpiece. Life had shifted its weight, and Calder had learned how to carry it. The auditorium wasn't large. No media coverage, no investors, just folding chairs, half-drunk coffee in paper cups, and a fundraiser banner that looked like it had been drawn by children, which of course it had. He straightened his collar. Not a suit, not a custom-tailored anything, just a button-down shirt with a smudge of crayon near the cuff and a soft scent of cinnamon lingering from breakfast. A small podium waited under the stage lights, and beyond it, Isolde. She wasn't seated. She stood close to the edge, arms folded, calm in her eyes. Her expression said everything without a word. You've already done the hard part. Reed, Alien, and Wells were in the front row, their legs kicking excitedly. One held a sketch of a spaceship. Another had a notepad labeled Dad's Speech Tracker. The last, quiet as always, just held a folded piece of paper against his chest like it was treasure. Calder took a breath and stepped up. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice more fragile than planned. "I was once introduced as a man who created something the world couldn't ignore. But the truth is, I ignored something far more valuable." The room hushed. Even the children stopped fidgeting. I've stood in boardrooms, held meetings in cities I barely remember, and made decisions that shaped markets. But nothing, not a single moment, has come close to packing a school lunch with handwritten jokes inside. Scattered laughter. Not the kind that filled auditoriums, but the warm kind. The kind that welcomed you back. I used to think love was measured in effort, that if I built enough, earned enough, offered enough, I'd eventually be enough. He paused. But I was wrong. What my sons needed wasn't a provider, it was a presence. He glanced down at them. 3 sets of eyes lit up. Elian waved his notepad and whispered something about speech tracker says, 10/10. I've learned more in 6 months from 3 small boys than I did in a decade of growth reports and quarterly reviews. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper, a child's drawing, a stick figure holding hands with 3 others, all smiling. The tallest one had what looked like a lightning bolt necktie. Wells gave this to me after I read them a story one night. It was about a hedgehog who missed every party because he was always too busy preparing. At the end, he realized. No one waited forever. He folded the paper back up gently. I missed the first 5 years, but I won't miss the rest. He turned his gaze toward Isolde. There's someone else I owe this beginning to. She stepped closer, not as a CO parent, not even as an ex, but as a witness to transformation. She chose to protect what I once neglected. She built a world of love when I was too distracted to notice it slipping away. He paused, eyes searching hers. I used to think she left because she gave up, but now I know she left because she refused to settle for being forgotten. A silence passed. Then Calder added more softly. She never once spoke of hate. Only protection, only love. And then a smile broke across his face. Tired, yes, but deeply at peace. Today I stand here not to reclaim anything, but to offer something. He turned to the crowd. If you're someone who's chasing everything the world told you matters, I ask you to stop for 1 second. Look at what's right in front of you, because sometimes the best thing you'll ever build won't make the news, but it will call you Dad. Applause came slowly, then steadily, not for a polished speech, not for prestige, but for truth. As Calder stepped down from the podium, 3 boys rushed toward him. Reed leapt into his arms. Elian offered a robot schematic. Wells handed over a note that read, "Are you staying forever?" Calder kneeled. "I'm already home," he whispered, hugging them tightly. Behind him, Isolde walked forward. She didn't say anything at first, just slipped her hand into his. Not a grand reunion, not the promise of romance, but something better, peace, earned and understood. Calder turned toward her. "I lost 5 years," he said, repeating the line they both knew too well. "But I've gained something bigger." Her eyes were warm. "You've gained forever." They looked out at the crowd, teachers, parents, children, a few wiping their eyes, a few holding each other's hands, not because of a speech, but because somewhere in that room, truth had landed. As the event wrapped, someone turned off the mic. The children swarmed the craft table. Calder stood with his sons drawing Mars again. This time, Wells added a 5th figure, one with curly hair, holding all their hands. Isolde leaned her head gently on Calder's shoulder, and for the first time in years, he didn't think about what he had missed, only what he had found. They say stories end when the curtain falls, but some stories linger, not because they were loud, but because they were honest. This isn't just Calder's journey. It's yours. It's mine. It's the quiet ache we carry when we miss something we didn't realize we needed. It's the moments we spend chasing applause only to find silence in the spaces that should have held laughter. Maybe you've been there, building, climbing, proving, thinking that success is the key to worth, that being irreplaceable at work means you're winning at life. But if that climb costs you connection, was it ever worth it? For Calder, 5 years disappeared in a blur of conference calls, milestones, and sleepless ambition, all while 3 little hearts waited for someone they didn't know they were missing. One wanted to build with him. One wanted to fly. One just needed a hand to hold. They weren't on his calendar, but they were always meant to be in his life. We all make trade-offs. We all get busy. But here's what no one tells you sometimes: what needs you most won't demand your attention. It won't schedule a meeting or send a reminder. It'll wait, quietly, until waiting becomes goodbye. Isolde didn't walk away out of bitterness. She walked away because she refused to let her children grow up wondering if they were worthy of someone's time. She chose presence over pretense, love over longing. And Calder? He didn't just fight a court case. He fought himself, his old habits, his blind spots, and he won, not by proving anything to the world, but by showing up when it mattered most. To the parent watching this who's been working late every night, to the partner who hasn't said, "I love you" in weeks, to the friend who keeps meaning to call but never quite does. This story is for you. It's not a warning. It's a wake-up call. Because while the world applauds your hustle, your kids don't need an empire. They need you at the dinner table. Your partner doesn't want another bouquet. They want your attention. Your peace doesn't live in your paycheck. It lives in the moments you don't postpone. Let me ask you this. What's the one thing your heart keeps asking for when the noise fades? Is it a connection? Is it time? Is it forgiveness? Then choose it. Today. Because no legacy is louder than love. No award shines brighter than being known and needed by the people who matter. Calder's life didn't end in that courtroom. It started in the quiet questions his sons asked, in the way Wells clung to his shirt, in the unspoken grace that only children can give so freely. They didn't ask why he was late. They simply asked if he would stay. And he did. He stayed for every school play, every lunchbox sketch, every moment that made up for the ones he missed. Not perfectly, but fully. If you're carrying guilt, know this: love doesn't keep score. If you're carrying fear, know this: time won't wait. If you're waiting for the right moment, understand this: the moment is already here. You don't need a courtroom to find redemption. Sometimes you just need to show up, put the phone down, turn the laptop off, say the words, hold the hand. If this story moved you, if it cracked something open inside, don't let it end here. Look around. There is someone in your life who needs more of you. Not your achievements, not your promises, just you. So, give that hug. Make that call. Leave the office early. Say, "I'm sorry." Say, "I see you." Say, "I'm here now." Because the people who love you, they're not waiting for the perfect version of you. They're waiting for the present version. And when you choose them, you choose a kind of success no job could ever offer. If this story touched something deep in you, don't let that feeling pass. Like, comment, and subscribe. And share this with someone who might be chasing the wrong thing, someone who needs a reminder that love, presence, and forgiveness are the only things that last.